Welcome back, NodPod. Thank you guys so much for joining us for another episode of Chasing Heroin. I'm super excited. I'm a little nervous, but I'm super excited. Well, I am.
That's nice.
I am.
I appreciate that.
I have, because you're like the guy of what we do. You're like the guy of what we do. And I was actually thinking about this. So I know you're a Howard Stern fan. Are you a Joe Rogan guy at all?
I'm not really. No.
But you know who he is. Obviously.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Because I was thinking you are, regardless of, and you don't have to know anything about him to know this, you're like the Joe Rogan of our world for a couple of different reasons. And by our world, I mean the addiction recovery podcast world. So for one, the biggest, right? Almost 10 million downloads, over 400 episodes, but also you're like helpful to other podcasters, and he's super helpful to other comedians. Like he'll platform comedians. He especially has like women comedians come on because he thinks they don't get like a great shake. And the first time I ever connected with you through Doug, you were like super helpful. Our very first conversation, you were like, try the Roadcaster, blah, blah, blah. And then I was researching Erin Carr, who you recommended, and I was listening to her on Sober Buddy. And they were saying the same thing. The Sober Buddy host, I forget her name. She was like, well, Tara, she was like, well, Dave was like recommending that I do it this way. And Erin was like, well, yeah, no, he told me this. And I was like, oh, he helped me too. And I was like, oh, he's just out here like helping podcasters. That's cool.
Well, I mean, first of all, like, thank you. And second of all, in recovery, right? If I'm in recovery, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And people help me. You know what I mean? Like, I remember nobody's been as helpful as I am to me, but I remember there's a guy, he owns a podcast network called the Gas Digital Network. His name is Ralph Sutton. I'll give him credit. He has the #1 drug podcast called the Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll Podcast. It's not about addiction or recovery or even drugs. It's just the #1 drug podcast because I don't even know why. He's really good at search engine optimization and stuff. But me and Chris had started making the show, and we didn't have mics and we didn't have really anything. And he was like, if you have those things, your audience is going to grow a lot without you knowing why.
Right.
So over time, and I've been doing this almost 8 years, and I was super stubborn. We didn't get a mic for like a year or something. You know, we didn't get a mic for a year. And I only started using the Roadcaster, I want to say like a couple of years ago. And it was only because the audience hated the sound so much that they gave me the money to buy it. Literally, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like I listen, it's a long time coming. So I appreciate I'm honored to be in the situation where I could be helpful. And I appreciate that.
You've been very helpful. And I'm such an addict that first I was like, when I heard them say that, I was like, I thought he was only helping me. And then I was like, oh no, I guess it's fine. You know what I mean? And I was like, that's such an addict thing. I should tell him that because I feel like you would have a similar response. At first I was like, I thought it was just me because I'm the special one. But it's cool that you're like, you know, helping people and you're giving us all advice out here, you know?
You are the special one.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. So you've been doing it for 8 years. And I've heard you say this on your show before, because you and I are the same. You've talked about like the quote class of 2015. That's the year we both got clean. I am too. I'm January 2015.
Awesome.
And you're a few months after me. And I do feel like it was a good.
So you're way more sober than I am then.
No.
That's a lot of time.
I'm like 4 months. I'm like 4 months more sober than you.
No, you're like 8 months. I got sober in August.
Okay.
So that's like, if you were in elementary school, like you'd be much older than me.
That's true. That's true.
Like, so that's good. I think that's really cool. Like people who got sober in the same year.
Right.
I get a kick out of that.
No, it is really cool. And it is cool that we have 8 years because I, like you, used for a really, 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 really long time. Shooting heroin, methadone, the whole, the whole bit. But you can go back and listen to your show from the beginning. Oh, I didn't even finish my intro. Dave from Dopey.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi. Thanks for having me.
You know what? Okay, so Fentanyl J, who is a regular guest on Dave's show, was wanting to call you Dopey Dave, and you really didn't like it. I sometimes will say, I don't say Dopey Dave, but in lieu of your name, like if I'm talking like my husband or something, I'll be like, well, I was talking with Dopey and he said, and I just mean like you, but you didn't like the Dopey Dave when Fentanyl J was saying it.
I don't like the dopey either. But these are the things that I need to live with.
Okay.
They're small inconveniences.
You
You
don't
know what
like
I mean?
Dopey,
Like,
the name?
I love the name Dopey,
Okay.
but I didn't want it for myself.
Right. Okay.
It's like,
Fair.
and that's like a big thing about Dopey Dave. I never would have been Dopey Dave if Chris hadn't died. Wouldn't have been Dopey Dave and Dopey Chris.
That's
It would have been
true.
those guys from Dopey.
That's true.
You know?
That's true. That's true.
When Chris was alive, Dr. Drew would call us the Dopey Boys, which I thought was okay.
Yeah.
It's way better than Dopey Dave.
It's way better than Dopey Dave. Yeah.
Dopey Dave is like Goofy at Disney World or something.
Right.
And I just know this. And maybe it's because, like, the way you described yourself as an addict or an alcoholic. I know it's because of that I'm an addict and an alcoholic. But, like, I find that when people call me Dopey Dave, they really want to put me down.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just somehow intrinsically in the phrase. Like, they're saying it in a nice way, but I get there's a cut in there, and I don't want to fucking deal with that.
All right.
shit.
Okay.
You know
Okay.
what I mean?
That's fair enough.
On the other hand, I'm super pleased that Dopey is meaningful to people, and if that's the cross I have to bear, I think did you hear that? I mean, like, I went to record with Dr. Drew at his apartment around Christmas. I get to the building, and it's a beautiful building on the west side of Manhattan. and I'm like trying to figure out, there's like a bunch of buildings in that area, and I'm trying to figure out which one is theirs. So I go to the doorman and I said, I'm looking for the Pinskys. And since the Pinskys are famous, whatever, they were like, well, who are you? And I was like, I'm Dave Mannheim, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, well, you have to go to that building, right? So I go over there and I'm like, I'm here to see the Pinskys. And the guy's like, oh, Dopey Dave. You know what I mean?
Well, because you've built a whole brand, right? You've built a brand. And I've got some questions around that. I definitely want to talk about that. But before we even get to your show, let's go with you and how you got, where you're from and how you got started using. How do we get to, quote, Dopey Dave, which I'll never say again, except for that was the last time. So how do we get there?
It's okay. I can live with it. I'm trying to thicken my skin through effort.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Yeah. Like through hard work. I grew up in Manhattan. I grew up in Chelsea, middle class Jewish family. I grew up in low income housing, and my parents were both public school teachers in Manhattan. And I kind of had as normal a middle-class Jewish kid in Manhattan's life. I went to the same school from when I was 4 till I was 17, and I didn't drink at an early age. Like, I mean, the first time I drank, I blackout drank, but I had a really nice life. I went to one of the better public schools in Manhattan, and I really, really loved it. And I've been talking about this a lot lately. I think my addiction first kicked in with my friends. And I think my whatever underlying addict, alcoholic shit kicked in through codependency with my friends. And I think the first time I ever really felt the kind of hallmark addict, alcoholic feelings was when I wasn't with them. And it would be like summers. My parents worked at a summer camp, and I felt very alone and very excluded, and like, because I wasn't with these kids that I grew up with, these smart like kids where I didn't have to feel like I didn't have to be independent because I had them. I could totally disappear amongst them. And kind of the way I wound up disappearing through drugs later on. Then I blackout drank. I found I couldn't drink. And then I was kind of like, for an addict alcoholic, I was a late bloomer. Like, I didn't start using regularly until freshman year of college.
Didn't you go to a performing arts school though, or like a performance school?
No.
Oh, okay.
I went to a really, really, really renowned public high school in New York City. And I think the reason you thought that was because my senior year I interned at MTV.
This is why I thought that.
In our school, everybody finishes high school in 11th grade. And then in 12th grade, we have something called an inter-college year where we get an internship wherever we want. And I didn't know where I was going to intern, and I didn't have a plan, even though I loved MTV and I always wanted to be on TV. Like, I wanted to be a talk show host from as soon as I had an idea in my head. Yeah. I mean, it's pathetic. It's kind of pathetic.
It's not pathetic.
I mean, that was like my dream. I
That's
remember
not, why
like
would that be pathetic? I don't think that's pathetic.
because it's like I want to be this. It's like I want to be. It's not like I want to be like an actor or a movie producer or
You just
whatever.
want to be
I want to be.
seen and heard.
Well, I was like, it's really the thing that really attracted me was the idea of relaxation. And for example, so when I was a kid, I remember, like career, like I went to this very, very competitive school, like super competitive. When I got in, I was 4, right? 54-year-olds get in out of 10,000 that try to get in. You take a test, and then you're in it's an IQ test, and then you're in the simulated classroom. And like, so like my mother would say to me, I'm going to scrub the floors so you can go to Harvard when I was a kid. And literally like 85% of our graduating class went to Ivy League schools. Like it was like, it's a really, really good school. So like career and shit is always kind of on the back burner. And I remember 14, 15, like my mother would always listen to, there's a radio station in Manhattan called 1010 Wins. I don't know if you've ever seen Goodfellas, but when he's in the shower after the Lufthansa Heights and it says, we give you 22 minutes and we'll give you the world, that's 1010
Okay.
Wins. And my mom would always listen to this talk show in the morning called Rambling with Gambling, which is this old guy. And I was like, oh, my thought was he sounds so relaxed.
Okay.
It sounds like such a relaxing thing. And I was drawn to that.
Okay.
And then I was drawn to Regis Philbin.
Okay.
I was like, it's so relaxing. And then I was like, maybe I want to be a weatherman because that looks pretty relaxing. And you kind of are. I just had this like, and I'm sure attention, like I like that I got attention.
Right.
Right. I like the idea of being important without having to know anything. Like the newscast, I couldn't. And it's also funny because my dad actually teaches meteorology now, and he was like, well, you'd probably have to learn meteorology, and I was like, I don't want to do that. So
you definitely would have had to have learned meteorology, but like, okay, that's a wild goal for someone that's young to want to relax. I wonder why you thought the idea of relaxing was good. Were you like anxious as a kid?
I mean, I always say that probably most middle-class Jewish people are anxious.
I knew you were about to say that. I knew you were about to say that. As I asked, I was like, he's going to say it's a Jewish thing.
Well, I think neuroses is definitely hardwired into my genetics, but I think that I was anxious without knowing I was anxious. Like I think I had anxiety without ever being diagnosed with anxiety. I mean, just the fact that I was so drawn to relaxation at 14. Like that says something. Because I remember thinking that seems so relaxing. And then fucking Regis, I was like, wow, like I love what he does. He makes people feel comfortable. He's funny. He's having fun, and he's important. Like, and I liked all of those things. So like, that's what I wanted to do. But then with the internship, like I was not motivated. Like I was not motivated to find, like I went to high school with this guy named Max Kellerman, and Max Kellerman now is this like big ESPN commentator. Like he has a big show on ESPN. And when he was 13, he had a public access show in New York City called Max Unboxing. And he did it from age 13 to now, just fucking like motivated. And he's at the top of that world. And I was not like that. I mean, like I wound up at MTV because there was a guy I used to ride the subway with, and his father was a sound engineer, and his father worked on the old Harrison Ford movie Mosquito Coast, and he had a hookup at MTV. And I was like, oh, can you hook me up too? And he was like, yeah. And then I brought my best friend Devin, and then once we were there, I was just like scamming like crazy junkie style, and I wound up getting me and Devin on MTV. Like that's when like kind of my hustler mentality really kicked in. It was then.
So, because I've heard you say this on another show before, you didn't like finish the internship though. Didn't you fake a signature or something?
Yeah. Well, the irony was that we did finish the internship.
Okay.
We finished the internship, but to graduate, it required that your supervisor at the internship sign off on the work. And just, I don't know why Devin and I didn't go and get the signature we just didn't.
Okay.
We just figured we could forge it and
Right.
nobody would know
Right.
and it didn't matter.
Right.
And we forged the signature and they called the guy and the guy said, no, I didn't sign that. But we had done all the work.
Right. Yeah.
The guy said, no, I didn't sign that. And, you know, I wound up, you know, not getting credit and having to go to, I also got suspended from school. Oh, I mean, I had a bad senior year. I had done a lot of stupid shit senior year. Like we play a game at the high school I went to called Killer. And it's like the greatest game that could be played by high school students. Basically, it's a game where everybody has a gun, a plastic tracer gun, which shoots these discs. You know, it shoots plastic discs. And the whole, you know, a big population of the senior year, junior year, and sophomore year are divided into teams of 10. And all of New York City, anywhere, actually, the whole world is in bounds except for the block of our school.
Okay.
And you have to kill, it's a circle of teams, and your team has to kill the teams on the other side of your team.
Okay.
So like you're constantly hunting other kids or being hunted.
Okay.
And it goes for 2 weeks a year. And it's like the most fun you can have. And I played for like 4 years. And the last year that I played, like I got caught with a gun. And you're not allowed to play. Like there's an old wives' tale that somebody painted. The guns are orange and yellow and neon green, but there's an old wives' tale that somebody painted their gun black, and a cop almost shot them on the subway platform.
Okay.
So they caught me with one of these guns, and I got suspended. But they also caught me forging the signature. And for one of those things, I also directed a play in high school, and they didn't give me credit for directing the play.
Okay.
And I still have a resentment about that.
Clearly.
Because I directed the play.
Yeah, no.
And I did the internship.
So
it's like.
But here's why I'm bringing that up. Because when I heard you share that on another podcast, that's a dope fiendy move, right? Like those are all, because like my theory is that we start kind of like, I already had like the hustle in me when I was a kid. Cause I also went to a super like academically advanced high school. I did really well. It was all about like getting into a good college, all that stuff. But I would often like take shortcuts. I would often take the easy way out. And I think that that can be like a hallmark of addiction early on. I don't know. I heard you say that somewhere else. And on your show with Dr. Drew, just from this weekend, you were talking about your wife saying she calls it, you like are dope fiending her. And we do that. Do you know what I mean? And it shows up in different ways. And that to me, when I heard that story, I was like, that's kind of a dope fiend move. It's also a teenage boy move, fair. But like, you know, you stack up enough of those things and, you know, I think there's like a pattern of like, you know what I mean? Like the rules don't apply to me, that kind of idea.
Well, I think another thing that I left out was that I had a really overprotective mother. And because I had this really, really controlling mother, so like I would come home, I just learned to lie.
Yeah.
Like I learned to lie before I did anything. And I would come home from school and just lie. And I would only, and not for any purpose other than I didn't want to hear shit about what I was doing. And I still did, but I tried to like construct my reality so that my mother could say as little as possible about it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like that was my reason for being, like just not to hear shit from my mom. And I still did. So by the time we forged the signature, I was lying constantly and I was stealing, you know, like we would steal, like me and Devin, like after school, there was this record store near our high school called HMV. It was a big record store back in the day. And every Thursday or something, Devin would sleep at my house. And also, ironically, on Thursday, they had something called a free money machine at HMV where like you have to answer a trivia question and then you get in the free money machine and you have to grab the money out of the sky and you get all this money and then you can go spend it at HMV. And we'd buy records. And when you buy a record, they give you a giant bag. And then we'd wander around the record store every week and steal CDs and take the magnet off the CD and put it in the bag. So, and I stole constantly. I lied constantly. I was a liar and a thief way before I was a drug addict, you know? So I think your theory is good.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that
100%.
Another thing you've said is that, and you said this like early on in the show, if they put the bread and butter on the table when you're a kid, you're eating all of it. Me too.
Oh, yeah.
Me too. Those
Yeah.
are all addict
Yeah.
hallmarks, just little things that I feel like we take things to excess, long before the drugs show up. Okay, so you finish school, you do your internship, and then you go where?
I went to Ithaca College.
Okay.
I see.
Okay.
Should never have gone there. It's a big mistake. I went there because I had done this MTV thing, and I was thinking that I was going to have a career in television. And Ithaca College had a great television department. And I went to Ithaca College. The TV department, I didn't enjoy it. It didn't impress me. It was not like interning at MTV and being on MTV was like, I'm a smart ass kid and I'm funny and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like me and Devin were like hanging out with Kurt Loder. We met the first Real World cast.
That's crazy.
Like it was like very cool. And it was like they thought we were funny, and we interviewed Slaughter. We like went with Slaughter to a record signing in New Jersey. And like, it wasn't about like television production. It was like about we're funny, quirky kids and everybody loves us thing. And so when I went to college, it was like, this is how you edit a radio spot. This is how you make a public service announcement. And in retrospect, I really wish I had given it a chance. What I really wish, if you want to know my deep, dark regret, is that I wish I had tried making a movie. Like, I wish I had tried film back then, but I didn't have the self-esteem for it, and I didn't have the patience for it, and I didn't have the hard work. And instead, I was a musician. I played in bands in high school. I joined a band in college, and I immediately started smoking weed on a daily basis.
Okay. And weed becomes like, I've heard you say this so many times, you loved weed. Because even though I became a heroin addict, I was not a big, like, I was more of a stimulant person, right? I was not, even if I could smoke weed right now, I wouldn't. You know what I mean? I never liked it. But I know that was like, I've heard you say that was like a hallmark of your addiction. That was one of the things that you never wanted to give up, was smoking weed.
It's all brain chemistry though, right?
Yes.
Like why somebody might be a stimulant person, right, or somebody a marijuana person or whatever. I mean, my first drug experience, I want to say, was acid though. I just feel like I need to put that into this show. If this is a drug addiction show, I think it needs to be said that I tripped acid before I did weed, and I liked acid, but weed was like, it was almost like medicine. It hit me. It made me feel exactly the way I wanted to feel. Before I would say for me, weed, benzos, and heroin were my drugs of choice, and I can't rank them. Like each of them hit me in a perfect way.
Okay.
Like I think I liked weed more than benzos and heroin because weed, I never had seizures when I stopped doing them,
Yeah.
and I never went into full-on horrible withdrawal,
right.
Shitting and vomiting at the same time, and overdosing and shit. So I would say weed is my favorite because it was safer.
Right.
And I also really I loved the culture around it. Like I had been in that group of friends, right? And like that was my culture, and they're still my closest friends. I still talk to a ton of them very often. Once I became a stoner, I was accepted in a subculture that I was proud to be a part of.
Right. Well, that makes sense because it's like the music side of things. And, and I think so much about addiction is like the subcultures that we start to become a part of, right? When we don't feel a part of other things. Dude, the first time I did acid, I've actually never shared this story on the show. This is crazy that this happened. Also, it's crazy that you did that before you smoked weed. That's a jump. Like, that's unusual, I think. But
yeah, I don't even know how that happened.
So
yes.
I was at Music Midtown, which is a music festival in Atlanta. And I'd never done acid before. I was like 19, and I was sitting up on this wall, and Outkast was about to start playing on the stage in front of us, and the Wallflowers had been playing behind us. And I remember this like really clearly. And I was with my college roommate, Anna, and we're sitting on the wall, and we wanted to do acid that day, even though I'd never done it, but she had. And these two, it was like a movie, these two like hippie dudes, even wearing like those like shirts that they wear that are like thread, you know what I mean? They're like bright colors. They're like smocks. You know what I mean?
I don't know what you're talking about. Are you talking about those hoodies that look like they're made of hemp?
Yes, the hoodies, yeah. Those. Okay, so they're wearing those. Yeah. Least important part of the story, but they're wearing those. And I remember they're like walking through and they're even like going like this, and they see us and they're like, hey, you guys want some acid? They just said that to us sitting there. And I was like, you're not going to give us anything. And the guy was like, yeah, stick out your hand. And I stuck out my hand, and he had a breath mint bottle. Like, remember like the drops of mint? And he dropped it on my hand, and I licked it, and it tasted like breath mints. And I was like, dude, that wasn't anything.
Hold on.
Okay.
He gave you liquid? He gave you liquid?
Yes.
Wow.
And I licked it like an idiot at 19 years old, alone, me and this other girl in the middle of Atlanta. So I lick it, she does the same thing, and they disappear. But it tasted minty. And so I was like, okay, that guy was full of shit. It was obviously just like actually like breath mints. And then 20 minutes later, I'll never forget this. Right as Outkast started, the music, I went, that's weird. The music went like over my head and back. And I was like, that's weird. And I thought, oh shit. And at the exact same time, me and my friend turn and look at each other, and she'd done it before, and she just nodded. And I was like, oh shit. And I was tripping on acid in the middle of Atlanta accidentally, sort of accidentally. But that was, but I was not an acid fan at all. I did it one more time after that, and I did not like it at all.
But I bet even if you hadn't licked it, you would have tripped out just from him putting the liquid on your
From
hand.
being it on our hand. Yeah, that's probably true.
I never got liquid LSD, and it's on my list of regrets. The filmmaking and liquid LSD are right at the top of the list.
So wait, what is it not? Because the other time I did it was a sugar cube. And I guess it would have been dropped onto the sugar cubes. I'm not even that familiar with it. Like, what's the difference between liquid and what you did?
I mean, liquid acid is considered to be probably more powerful than the acid I ever did.
Okay.
The acid that I've always done is on paper blotter.
Okay.
So they take sheets of acid, and then they add the liquid to it, and then they dry it out, and then they sell little squares, and they call them hits of acid. I never had a sugar cube. I never had a gel. I only had paper LSD, and I tripped LSD probably, I don't know, 60 times or something.
Right.
Thereabouts, 60 to 100 times.
Anyways, okay, so smoking weed, Ithaca. How do you get to heroin?
Oh man, how do I get to heroin? I feel like I love drug addict culture before I knew it was drug addict culture. Like, it started just as like hippie culture or counterculture. Like, I got into like the idea of New York City beat writers and Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and all that stuff. And then I started smoking a bunch of weed, and then I read the book, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. So I was like, oh, and then the Grateful Dead were kind of in that book with Ken Kesey, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest at my high school. So I was like, oh, I had a foot in that race. And I'd seen the Dead, but I wasn't a Grateful Dead fan. I just wanted to do acid. I think it really all came together when I read The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. And I was like, I want to be a hippie. I also was such a Beatle fan. Like, I was such a Beatle fan, and the Beatles were just such counterculture heroes. I think it's more out of the Beatles than anything else. And then, not to mention, I loved how drugs felt. Like, I had this idea in my head, and then I loved how drugs felt. So in Ithaca, I did as much acid as I could, and I ate a bunch of mushrooms, and then like we started to get pills, and here and there. And we started selling weed, and we started selling acid and selling whatever we could. And then I got busted there. But Ithaca also was expensive. It was a private school. My parents couldn't afford it. I had only gone there because of the TV program, and I had dropped out of the TV program like half a semester in. So I was studying art history, and I would like get high and like go sit in a dark room and watch them discuss art. And I realized, like, between the fact that I was an outcast at Ithaca, it was very much like there was frat boys, and there were hippies, and there were alternative people. And I was like none of those things. Like, I was not a proper anything. So I applied to an art school in the SUNY system, which is the State University of New York, because it's like, a quarter of the cost. And then me and my friend got busted with a bunch of weed, and we had gotten accepted to SUNY Purchase, which was this art school. So as soon as we got busted with the weed, Ithaca suspended us, but we accepted the transfer.
Okay.
So like we transferred without ever getting suspended after we had gotten. So that was like this great hustle where we avoided consequences. And Purchase was like a serious art school. And any serious art school is a serious drug school. And we sold a ton more acid. Like, me and my roommate like would buy acid once a week and sell, sell sheets every week, did a bunch. He grew up in Poughkeepsie, and one of his best friends was in like a kind of notable shoegazing band of that era. And he was a heroin addict, and he had done heroin, and he brought a bunch of heroin out to purchase. And we were like, let's do heroin. And we did the heroin. I wound up throwing up, and I was like, I didn't love it. And I still loved weed. And I was like, I'm not doing dope. I'm just going to do weed. And tried coke, didn't love it, didn't care, stayed smoking weed, graduated college like on time. Everything was fine. Moved into Brooklyn, and then I moved into Manhattan, and I had a serious girlfriend, and we broke up, and my friend moved in. I had grown up in public housing in Manhattan, and my mother had put me on a waiting list to get an apartment in our buildings when I was 11. And when I was 21, my name came up, and I got this super cheap studio apartment on 24th Street. And I had just had this breakup. And one of my best friends in college, who is now very dopey famous, was named Todd. He was living upstate with his parents, and he was like, oh my God, you got a place in Manhattan. Can I live with you? And I had just broken up with this woman, and I was like, yes, because I didn't want to be alone. I could not handle being alone. And I was like, come live with me, and I'll pay the rent, and you buy drugs. And he moved in with me. He loved coke, and I would do coke, but I didn't really like it. And then I started working more in TV, and I got a production assistant job, which became like a TV scouting job. And I went on a scout to Lansing, Michigan. And when I came home, there were all these kids from Purchase in my apartment with Todd, and they were all buying coke. We had found a delivery service that would deliver every drug, and they delivered coke. And I walked in the house with these bags, and there was like 10. I come home from the airport, I put my bags down, there's 10 kids in the house buying coke. And I was trying to be like a hustler, like you talked about. And I said to the dealer, like, all right, well, you're making all this money in my apartment. What do you want to give me for it? And he gave us 2 bags of heroin. And me and Todd did the heroin. I loved it. I loved it way more than I had liked it the first time.
You shot it or snorted it, or what did you?
We snorted it. Snorted it.
Okay.
And I didn't start using it every day. You know what I mean? But I loved it. I loved it that night. We watched The Simpsons. We nodded out. I woke up in the morning. I was even higher in the morning because it was a little too high at night. And then by the morning, I was like, I was right. And I was like, wow, this is exactly how I want to feel. And I kind of succeeded at that TV job. And as I did better, I kind of I think I was nervous, I was anxious, and heroin really, made you feel better
right.
if you were nervous or anxious. So I think like we would do it like on Sundays or Saturday, or then we'd start doing it on Wednesday and Friday. And I was pretty careful to not do it every day because I had read enough books about junkies and stuff. But I had pitched a show to this TV company to do this music magazine show where I'm interviewing bands and shooting concerts and stuff. And they gave me the show, and the show was, nobody watched it. I'm sure more people listened to Dopey than ever watched that show, but they gave me a contract out of it. And the contract, I was like 23, and they offered me like $100,000 for 3 years. And I was like, and I was paying $300 a month. I was like, oh my God, I'm rich. But my first thought really was, I can afford to be addicted to heroin. And I made the decision that I was going to, I remember it was not like a weird thing. I was like, I'm doing it. I'm doing it every day. I'm doing it. And that's how it all happened, really.
So you did know you get dope sick, because I didn't know, but you knew.
I had never been dope sick. I read enough about William Burroughs and Miles Davis and John Lennon to know that people get dope sick. But I just had dope. And I was so smart that I thought me with and I don't even think I made $100,000. I think I made $80,000. But I'm so grandiose in telling the story that I'm calling it $100,000. But I made $80,000. They gave me $10,000 up front. I was such a fucking hustler at that point. They offered me 40. I had a friend working at another place, and I lied and said he had a deal where he offered me 70.
Oh my God.
So they gave me 80, and I was like, but you need to give me $10,000 up front. I thought I was the fucking shit.
That is pretty ballsy, though. I would never have done that. That is actually pretty ballsy that you did that.
Well, I needed the 10 grand
Right,
to
yeah.
put down on my apartment.
Okay.
So like, cause I was paying like this loan off. So I was like, and I felt like I had it together. So I put the 10 grand down, and then I'm like, it was so easy for me. Like I was succeeding and it was easy. And the heroin like kept me from worrying, but it really did what heroin always does, is it made me a jerk, and it made me like not conscientious and not detail oriented and not accountable, and like I just got worse and worse at every aspect of my work. And it was a dream job. It was a dream job that I totally destroyed. But I really like, how like everybody, especially, everyone loves to say how they don't give a fuck about this or that. I don't give a fuck, blah, blah, blah. I really gave a fuck about everything. And I only felt like I didn't give a fuck when I did heroin. And I was like, I need that, is what I thought.
Right. Is this when you added, because I have never heard, this was a genius idea, and I've shared it on the show before. I don't really want to give people ideas, but it's a very good idea. I've shared this before. You put liquid heroin in an Afrin nose spray. Is this when you had that job, or this is when you were doing some other gig? Do you remember this? So you could use it on a plane.
Yeah.
That was a good idea.
I don't think it was my idea.
Okay.
But
because I had to bring dope on a plane before, I wish I would have thought of that.
I don't remember who thought of it.
Okay. You could take credit for it, because I've been giving you credit.
If I was to guess who it was, I would never have put it together.
Okay.
The person who I will give credit to regardless is Todd.
It's Todd. Okay.
Todd was a master of all things nefarious. And he was living in the apartment, and me and him were getting high together, and you couldn't put, maybe you could have put powder in an Afrin bottle, but you could just snort powder. You didn't have to put it in an Afrin bottle. Right. But him and my friend Jeremy were using with me every day, and they got habits, and they got really scared, and they didn't have like a good TV job. So they got in their car and moved to California, and Todd wound up in San Francisco, and he wound up doing tar in San Francisco. And Todd was terrified of needles, and he didn't love smoking it. So I think he found the Afrin bottle in San Francisco.
Okay. Yeah, because that's all that's out here is tar. I've never seen the powder stuff, actually. I only ever saw tar. So you get a habit. At some point you get to LA, right? When do you move to LA?
After I get fired from the TV job. And I get fired from the TV job. My habit is out of hand.
Okay.
My parents want me to go to real rehab because I had been to like free detox like 100 times or 20 times, some crazy amount of times. And they found a rehab in Florida that was willing to give me a scholarship.
Okay.
I'd never gotten a scholarship to school, but I could get a scholarship to rehab. So I went to a rehab in Florida. And in the rehab in Florida, they told my parents that my parents were enabling me if they paid my rent. And my rent was only $300 a month in Manhattan. Like people like kill for that thing. But the rehab convinced my parents to give up the apartment. And I moved to California to live with Todd, where he had just become addicted to meth. Okay. So I moved out there and started doing meth. Okay. And that's when I was in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And that was probably 2002 or 2003.
Okay. So, and this is another part of your story that I love, that I want to ask you about. So I think at the same time, so I'm also obsessed with 90210. Obsessed. And I would watch it on FX back to back in Georgia. So I was in college at this time at 9 and 10 and 4 and 5. And I've also
same episodes.
Yes.
And they would show the same episode.
And I've heard you say that too. And so I think at the same, because it was like during the same time of programming that FX was running those shows. Like, so I was probably in Georgia watching it. You were in California watching. I was not doing heroin yet. I was drinking and I wasn't really doing that yet. But that's when you started your 90210 habit, right? Because I love that you're a guy that admits that you love 90210. That's awesome.
Well, I grew up in the 90s and I didn't I had a girlfriend in high school who loved it. And I was like, that's not cool, right. Blah, blah, blah. But in the back of my head, I was like, I think I'm missing out on something. But it was in New York. And Todd loved 90210.
Okay.
And like there was a stretch where we didn't work and we would sit on the floor in my apartment and smoke weed and then do heroin and watch 90210. And like we were so excited when Dylan got strung out. And like
totally.
Todd loved soap operas. And like 90210 is the ultimate soap
Totally,
opera for a
totally,
kid.
totally.
So yeah, that was where the 90210 obsession came.
Dude, part of why I wanted to do coke was because Kelly Taylor picking up the habit. I always wanted to be Kelly Taylor, and I just wasn't. Like, I kind of had like the awkward physical appearance of Donna Martin. I was always like changing my appearance, but I just wanted to be Kelly. And when she started doing coke, that was like part of why when it came my way, I like kind of wanted to be like Kelly Taylor. That was definitely part of it.
It's so funny because like these TV shows say, oh, maybe we're giving kids bad ideas here. And they definitely were.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's like, but it's, I guess we're going to get bad ideas.
Right.
Kids get bad ideas no matter what.
Right.
You can't.
Right.
I mean, do they though? It's like, would anyone do heroin if they hadn't seen it on something? I got the bad idea of doing drugs because of the movie or the Beatles and the movie The Doors. So I guess like,
okay.
I remember I saw The Doors when I was a junior in high school, and I left that movie being like, I really need to do drugs. Dude, I remember walking out of there just thinking that I need to do drugs.
The part when he's on the fence and he's all fucked up and he's holding onto a fence and he's like, wait, what? Like the way that that moment, I would like rewind and watch over and over again. I originally got my idea. I wanted to be Ginger from Casino. When I watched Casino,
wow.
I know.
Wow.
Which is fucked up given how it ends. But like, I just wanted to be the first part when she has the fur coats and she's doing coke in the casino and she's so glamorous. I absolutely got a lot of my ideas from Casino. In fact, House of the Rising Sun still reminds me of doing drugs. I can listen to it, but like it still kind of makes me want the Animal song, obviously. It still like kind of makes me want to do drugs, you know? Do you still have that connection? Because I know music is like a huge part of like everything about you. Are there any songs that are, I hate the word trigger, but triggering for you that like remind you of using or make you want to use again?
I don't think they make me want to use again. It's more like euphoric recall.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't think they make me want to use, and there's a ton of them. You know, I mean, I was on drugs for like 12 years, 14 years, 15 years. Like, yes, but it's not triggering. It's more like I reminisce nicely about it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't make me want to use. It makes me more just be like, oh yeah, I remember I used to get high and listen to that song.
Right. Yeah.
From
Totally.
time to time.
Totally. Okay. So we're in LA. And another one of my favorite stories that I would love for you to share is when you were working the kids' parties.
Oh yeah.
Can you share one of those?
I barely worked.
Okay.
Like when I was in LA, like I got one job. Like I was like, I worked on a TV show and I was such a train wreck IV addict. Like I kept needles in the drawer of the bathroom, like in the TV station, you know, and I'm shooting heroin in that bathroom and I'm shooting meth in that bathroom and I'm shooting, you know, speedballs of meth and heroin in that bathroom. And I was like, I drove a car without brakes. Like, and I had to drive people around and I'd be like, just brace yourself. You know, it was a miracle. It was a miracle that nobody got hurt.
How would you stop the car if it had no brakes? How would you stop the car?
I would like let it coast. I would like let it coast for a long time. I remember like, I mean, I think it happened twice. And one of the times, like I was coordinating a shoot with these models on a train and I had to pick up one of the models and she's driving with me. And I'm like coasting through a parking lot and I have nightmares about it still. And I'm coasting like around the parking lot. And I think I was like getting away. And I'm not a good driver either. This sounds like something only a good driver should do. But I'm coasting and coasting. And I don't know, I timed it in a way that like I hit a tree, you know, but it didn't like smash into the tree, but the tree stopped us, you know. I should tell that. I don't think I've ever told that story on the
I've
show.
never heard that story.
So, but then my girlfriend moved to LA and we lived together and she took care of me like in a major way. And I was on methadone and I was on benzos and I was on heroin. And I had a job working at a weed dispensary. I was the security in the weed dispensary. And I'm like nodding out and fat and like it was like I was the worst security in the history of weed dispensaries. I saw an ad somewhere for people to make money working at kids' parties. And I went down to the interview and they were like, this is an interview. You got the job. We're going to teach you how to blow up animals. And they give you like this pump to blow up balloons. And I was like, all right, great. And like back then, like there was no GPS. You had a Thomas guide, which is like
I remember
this
those.
book
I could
with
never figure
maps
out how
and
to
shit.
use those. Somebody gave me a Thomas. Anytime you move to LA, some asshole gives you a Thomas guide, and I have no idea how to work it. But anyways, go ahead. I never could figure out the Thomas guide.
No, but I mean, I think that the people who can't figure out the Thomas guide can't live in LA.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like now, I guess GPS, but like my friend Jeremy and Todd, they like understood it. They could use it. I had no idea what I was looking at. I'm just like, I don't know what's happening. I'm a terrible driver. I don't know what the map is. Like, it's just a mess. But then they're like, you're going to work kids parties. First party, I had to dress up as a Mighty Morphin Power Ranger. And again, I was like fat. And the Mighty Morphin Power Ranger is supposed to be very fit. And I was high. I was high on heroin and I was chain smoking cigarettes. And I'm like, I'm the Mighty Morphin Power Ranger. And it was like funny. And I was fun. Oh man, I had another job out there. It's worse than these jobs where I was like, I don't even know what the job was. There was some like kid who was on the spectrum or really very learning disabled. And I was supposed to take care of the kid. Like, I don't know how I got this job. I took the kid to school.
Okay.
For a year, I went to school with this kid. I can't even believe that I did this. All right. And I'm on drugs, right? I'm totally on drugs with this kid in elementary school. Okay. And I should be more embarrassed of this story, except I think it's really funny. I would sit in class with the kid, with all these kids, a class of kids.
Okay.
And teachers would ask questions and I would raise my hand and answer the questions. And I was in my 30s. And I would be like dominating the classroom, this high 30-year-old. I don't know how they never like kicked me out. Like, I don't know how it ended, but I went to that school every day for months.
That's like a real life Billy Madison. Like, that happened to you.
I never saw Billy.
You didn't? Okay, well, now you need to. And now I'm wondering if somebody based it off of you because you were in LA. Basically, that's what he does. So, but you don't remember how that job ended? I mean, probably not well. I'm sure somebody asked you.
I mean, I'm sure it didn't end well. Right. But like last week when Dr. Drew was on the show and I asked him about benzo use, and he said those memories are never coming back.
They never even get filed, he said. That was fascinating. Yeah. By the way, Dr. Drew gets it. Like, I was just listening to that episode yesterday when he was talking about addicts lying, and he was like, they're all so full of shit. Because I feel like there's like this easier, softer way kind of coming around about addicts. And as a former junkie, full of shit, dope fiend, like, I just love that he said that. He was like, they're lying, they're full of shit. And sometimes you just have to say they're full of shit. But yeah, when he said the benzo thing, the memory's never even getting filed. I thought that was fascinating.
Horrible. So so I don't know how that job ended.
Okay.
I just know that like it's a dark situation to be like, I'm supposed to be helping this kid. It should be embarrassing, except that I know how funny it is and how it's the R word. It is definitely like, it is what's the new word for that? What's the new R word?
I mean, disabled or challenged. It's mentally challenged.
I was severely challenged. But I was also like on 20 milligrams of Xanax every day or thereabouts of Klonopin and 150 milligrams of methadone and still doing dope and still smoking weed and like in the school. But the job that you were asking about for that fucking kid show is the first one was the Mighty Morphin Power Ranger and the second one was Big Bird. But the Big Bird costume wasn't like a good Big Bird costume. It's like a swap meet kind of Big Bird costume with like really matted feathers and like one eye is looking here and the other eye is looking down. And they had these really cool Big Bird feet, but they didn't give you tights. And like I have these very white hairy legs. So between the feet and the tunic was just my white hairy legs. And also I'm on heroin and reeking of cigarettes and weed. And like, I went to a party. I probably got there an hour late. Right. I was probably like slurring the whole time. And it was bad. I don't even think I got fired from that job. I think I quit because it was just, it was traumatic. Like that experience, the trauma for me wasn't Like,
disappointing children. No.
the trauma was being late. Like, I couldn't like being lost.
Yeah.
And being lost in LA. Like, it was like in Covina or something.
Right.
Like, I was lost in like the outskirts of town and shit. But like then another job I had in LA that I never talk about this job. Somehow I got a job in another school teaching graffiti.
What?
Right. And I can't write graffiti. Like, I don't know what the fuck I was teaching about graffiti.
Okay.
Like, I don't. And I bought all the kids like black books and markers and stuff. And like, we're writing in the books. And all I know is that job ended because I had a seizure while I was teaching the class. And that was the end of that job.
Because of withdrawing from benzos?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh my God. Yeah. No, that one I've never heard you talk about. The Big Bird one is hilarious.
I told the story about the teaching kids because it's so sad.
Yeah.
It's just so pathetic. The graffiti story I don't tell because it doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I don't understand that job. I don't know what that was. The greatest guest I could ever have on Dopey would be my ex-girlfriend at the time. But like, it would create too much problems in my current life to do it. But she is the holy grail of Dopey guests. Because like my whole life would come to life.
Would she do it?
I don't know.
Okay.
We talked shit about her. Like, she wound up leaving my oldest friend for me. And I betrayed my oldest friend. And she was with him, and me and her hooked up. And I had my oldest friend on Dopey, and she listened to it. And she was like, "You did me dirty on that." And, like,
shit.
it wasn't good.
Okay, so you and he restored your friendship though, or sort of.
Yeah, we're totally restored, but you know, it'll always be fractured.
Right.
But we were best friends from age 4, and her and I got together probably at age 24.
Okay.
So
wow.
20 years of incredible friendship, and then I betrayed him, and then she wound up in a relationship with me, and then me and him didn't speak until I was 35.
Okay. So let's get to. Eventually I know way more happens, right? Eventually you make your way back to New York. Let's talk about your last use, what that looks like. A lot happens, right? But
yeah, I know. It's like, I need to figure out how to streamline my story. I really have no idea how to streamline my story.
This is pretty streamlined. You live in California for a while and then you come back. I'm kind of keeping it tracking, right? And then you come back to New York, kind of.
I came back to New York. My mother got diagnosed with leukemia. I had made the decision that I wasn't going to let my mother die of leukemia while I was on methadone in Los Angeles. So I started detoxing from methadone, and I detoxed from methadone, and I went back to New York. And that's when I started working at Katz's. And my mother died, and I got off of methadone, I got off of heroin, and I got off of benzos, but I kept smoking pot. And then Linda, who I'm with now, who we have 2 children. I mean, we've basically married without ever getting married, and we own a house, and, you know, we're married without getting married. I met her when I was a kid. She was friends with Todd, and I met her again right after my mother died, and we started dating. And within a few months, she got pregnant. And I didn't think, like, I got scared and whatever, and I wound up relapsing, and we wound up having our first daughter. And Todd showed up with a bunch of dope, and I wound up relapsing. So my last run was kind of around then. There's 2 runs. I started, you know, using really, really hard then, and Linda left. And she took our daughter and she went to Long Island, and I stayed in Manhattan, and I got a really, really bad heroin habit in Katz's. And I was managing Katz's at the time, and they caught me and they fired me. And meanwhile, like, I never missed a visitation with my daughter, but I was always high. And my father had to supervise the visitation. And when I got caught at Katz's, I realized, like, I was in such trouble. And I begged them to not fire me. And they were like, "Well, we're going to fire you. You're not going to manage the store, but you can go to rehab and you can come back and you can be a waiter." And I went to rehab, and that's when I met Chris. And went back to Katz's. I became a waiter. I got 10 months clean, and then I started smoking weed again. I tried to fix things with Linda, and then I started taking benzos again. And she found out, and she was like, "We're not getting back together." And that's when I really got sober. When I was 41, I had failed so many times. I had done it over and over again. Our daughter was 4.5. And and all I wanted was our family to be together. And we were just getting our family back together when she realized I was on Klonopin, and she was like, I'm not doing this. And that's when I went to an AA meeting. I went to an AA meeting. It was like some 28-year-old kid with tattooed sleeves and very handsome kid. And he was celebrating 10 years. I had like 10 hours, and I was like, this fucking kid. And I, for some reason, I decided to go up to him and tell him how annoying I thought he was. I don't know why. Like, I don't know why. Like, that would be something you would do. Maybe because I needed to hear something good. He's like, "Well, is today going to be your first day?" And I was like, "I don't know." It was just the idea that it could be my first day was like not on my radar. Like, I had put a little bit of time together, but never really sober time. Like, I had been abstinent, but I was never really sober. And when he said that, and that phrase, the obsession being lifted, kind of really started to resonate with me because I had been so obsessed with being with my family. Like, it was really all I wanted. I was so obsessed with it. I couldn't work a shift at Katz's without talking to somebody for hours about how I had fucked up my family. And like, I was ruminating so hard that I went to 12 step to have the obsession be lifted. And when I got there, they were like, I told them my story, and they were like, well, this meeting meets every day. Do you want to come back tomorrow? And I was like, yes. And then I really jumped in, and that's when I got sober.
That's interesting that that's actually the obsession that brought you back, because like in longer term recovery, you can use the steps for other obsessions, right? Like when I owned my studio and I was like upset about it all the time, I would have to do like a step 1 on all the things I couldn't control. And that's what brought you back. During that time, was Linda talking to you, or was she like, no, done? I know the first time when you were visiting, she would still let you visit. But what about, I'm wondering how hard the line was, like what kind of a boundary she set. And do you think that that was what helped you? Because she set a hard line on this.
Well, she wanted me to have a relationship with our older daughter, and I wanted to have a relationship with our older daughter. So I never missed a visitation. And even though I was using the way I was using, I never missed child support payment. So like, she had boundaries with me in the beginning when I was using. Like, she wouldn't be there when I would get there, and she wouldn't be there when me and my dad would bring Nora back. But by the time I was actually sober, neither of us thought the relapse that had cost us of the relationship was so crazy. So we were talking, we were talking, and like, I would still pick up Nora and drop her off. So we would talk then. It was around then that I think I set a different boundary, because I was so vested. Like, all I cared about was being with Linda and Nora. I didn't care about anything else. So by the time I actually got sober, and she didn't want to be with me, but she wanted to have she wanted to be with me, but she didn't want to be with me sick. So I think I just said, let's just not do this. If you don't want to be with me, let's not do this. And that's when I really started working a program. And it was a couple months later that she decided she did want to do it.
Wow.
So that's how it went.
Okay. That was August of 2015. And you have now been, right? Is the end of all of this, right? So.
Oh, besides last summer where I smoked crack half the summer. No, I'm just kidding. No,
like,
since 2015. Since 2015, I have not had a mind or mood altering substance except NyQuil, Benadryl, liquid LSD, only on the holidays. No, NyQuil and Benadryl has been the only potentially mind or mood altering substance. But no, I've been abstinent since then and working a program.
And you started your podcast fairly early into your recovery, right?
Yeah, I want to say November, December, like 4 months in, we started Dopey.
Were you
4 months in?
Were you nervous? So, because I always kind of wanted to do something like that too, but I was constantly relapsing. And so I was afraid to even like start something like that. Like, I'm shocked that you were willing to, although I guess you kept it really anonymous. Were you afraid that once you started it, you might relapse again? You couldn't have known you would end up getting 8 years and that this would be the time that it would work. Or were you just like, fuck it, we're just going to start telling stories together?
Well, first thing is that when I was smoking weed in that relapse, my juices again were flowing to do a talk show thing or make a TV show. And I was at Katz's, and I was like, Katz's is so special. Like, we should do something here. And I wanted to do a show about the guys that work at Katz's and call it behind the counter, like behind the music, but behind the counter. Because the guys at Katz's, like, they're probably 95% Dominican. It's like very much old New York. It's like no other place. And they're funny as hell and crazy. And like, it's just like, it's like a movie always. And I was like, I want to do a TV show about these guys. So we started shooting, but the guys weren't funny on camera. They were cheesy. They were stupid and cheesy. But I did find that if I fucked with them and incited them, they were super funny and they were just mean to me and super funny. So we decided to do a web series at Katz's called The Last Jewish Waiter. And The Last Jewish Waiter was this web series about a waiter who wants to be a talk show host, but he's a waiter and he hates waiting tables. So he does a talk show while he waits tables. We did 3 episodes of it and I got like a shopping deal. Like the people who did Anthony Bourdain's show
Oh, wow.
signed me. And like we wound up making this big sizzle reel and they flew me to LA and all this shit. And Chris had heard about it and he was like, oh man, I want to do something like that. That was right before, maybe that was like half a year, 6 months before I bottomed out. And so like when I got sober, Chris had been sober like a year and change, and I was talking to him a lot about 12-step. He had been writing. He had written some articles for Salon and for Vanity Fair and for a couple different places. And he was like, oh, I want to do something like that. And I had another friend who had an idea for a podcast about the worst drug stories ever. He would get celebrity drug stories and he put them together. And I stole the idea from him. And I said, Chris, why don't we, because me and Chris had met in treatment and just told each other fucking stupid, horrible stories. And I was like, why don't we just do a podcast about the worst things we have ever done? It was also very much like Artie Lang on the Howard Stern show, which is, again, it was my dream from the beginning to do something like that. So when Chris agreed to do it, was not, I mean, it's barely meant to be a recovery show now.
Right.
It was not meant to be a recovery show. It was meant to be a comedy show. It was meant to be like a comedy show of 2 drug addicts chilling, keeping you company, just like John Gambling kept my mom company when I was 14. Like that was the point. That was the whole point. And then we only talked about recovery because it seemed like we were glamorizing drugs and it needed to be said that we were sober. And then it became more about addiction and recovery. I mean, so like really it was the same thing like when I was on at MTV. It was that. It was not like some recovery thing.
Right. Did you know, because like I've studied now since I had my business, like building a brand and stuff. You did all the things. You and Chris did all the things to really develop and build a community like Dopey Nation, Stay Strong. Like you have, you know, like the names and the nicknames, like that's how you like build a community and grow something. With your background in media, did you know to do that? Because I, in one of the early episodes, because I only recently went back and listened from the beginning, right? Like I picked up a few years ago. And then when we met and I knew I was going to be able to interview you, I went back to the beginning. And it was so cool to listen to it unfold. And the Stay Strong, you were saying very early on, a couple of episodes in. So like, did you have some awareness that like those are the hallmarks of developing a community and a brand, or that just happened?
It's funny. No, like, I mean, maybe instinctually there was something. I mean, like Chris, for whatever reason, he was way more tuned to that kind of stuff than I was. Like Chris, like first episode, right? I said, hello and welcome to Dopey, the podcast about drugs, addiction, and other dumb shit. And then Chris was like, that's how you have to start every episode.
He loved it. Yeah.
Like he had, yeah. He was like, and Chris was like, he was probably like a little spectrum-y. Like he understood repetition. Okay. And the Stay Strong, like once it became clear that we were doing recovery stuff and I so didn't like that, like I was trying to make fun of the idea of staying strong.
Okay.
And then I think Chris was naturally competitive. So once I started saying stay strong, he needed to get the last word in. So he started to say toodles. And when we had started making the show, for example, like we needed music, I was like, there's a Beatles song called Hey Bulldog. So we used Hey Bulldog as the theme song, but then like 29 episodes in, Chris was like, they're probably gonna like sue us one day or
Yeah.
something. So like I had a song, you know, I had a song that worked really well. And then on another episode, I was like, Chris would come in from wherever, Great Barrington, Massachusetts, once a month to record 4 episodes with me. So by the time it was the 3rd episode, and they were mostly shorter. They're much shorter than they are now. They were like a half an hour when we started doing them. Then they would get a little bit longer, a little bit longer. So by the time we were in the 3rd or 4th episode, I was exhausted, and Chris was probably exhausted too, but I go to bed early, so I would like start passing out. And one night he was like, "Why don't you play a song?" So I played Good So Bad in the middle of the show, and Chris was like, "We're going to use that at the end of every episode now." So like that's how that happened. So I mean, a lot of the Brandy stuff was because Chris, he was fine-tuned.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the reason why Dopey got any traction from the beginning was because Chris figured out how podcasts work in
Yeah.
a way that I didn't.
Yeah.
He took every drug name and he put it in the title. I mean, first it was called just Dopey Podcast, and then it would say Dopey Podcast, you know, heroin, coke, weed, acid, you know, and then we were like, we need a better name. It should have just stayed that way.
Yeah.
But then we were like, I don't know how it happened. I remember for months we were talking about it, and he was like, we were trying to come up with like a subtitle, you know. So like, I think he wanted to call it like darkly comedic addiction tales is what Chris wanted to say. And then we turned it to the dark comedy of drug addiction. I mean, because you needed an explanation
Right.
in the title.
Totally. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, the brand, that's how all that shit
That's how all that happened. So it was organic. It was kind of accidental because like I thought that it was just kind of like accidental and it was these 2 guys. And then the more that I learned about your story, I was like, okay, it was kind of accidental. But at the same time, Chris was a writer. He was obviously really intelligent. Dave had this background in like, you know, in TV and being creative. And so it makes sense that it worked. There is so much foreshadowing in the show leading up to, for those of you guys that don't know, eventually his co-host dies of an overdose in 2018, right? Chris, is that when he passed away? It is like Shakespearean, the level of foreshadowing in the show. I mean, I'm sure you've gone back and like in the last episode before he dies, you say, because you're telling a story, the praying mantis story, which is actually really funny. He's not connecting with it. He's like, yeah, they bite, right, man? Like, you know, obviously hindsight is everything, but when you're listening, it's like he just didn't have the same responses that he would normally have and all the stuff that you said later. And you say, you're like, what are we even doing, dude? Like, yeah, it's funny, but one of us could just drop dead. You say that. It's just wild. Like, what do you think when you go back and you hear all that stuff? Like, obviously, like, it's like Shakespearean, honestly, the arc there.
The truth is, I listened very sparingly.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, because just before Chris died, Todd died. And when Todd died, I was just devastated. And my take on our show really changed a lot. Because I mean, like we had a lot of people die, but none of them were really close to me. Todd was really, really close to me. And Chris was using, but I didn't know he was using. And I mean, the only thing like that really stays in my head was how blasé he was about Todd's death and how much it fucking pissed me off. And then when Chris died, I was so angry about it. Like I'm only starting to not be angry about it now, and I'm still angry about it. Like because we had a huge fight where I thought he was using. The answer to your question is I don't listen to it.
Okay.
I don't like I might have heard that once. I think that there's so much trauma and craziness around the experience of all this stuff happening that like I don't listen to it. I mean, when they did the This American Life thing, I listened to that. I don't think they had that quote that you just described. I remember how annoyed I was with him that night because the praying mantis story was so funny.
It was hilarious.
And I mean, well, the Bed Bath and Beyond story, nobody ever talks about. That's my favorite story. Like where it was a dumb fucking story. But if Chris hadn't been high on heroin, it would have been really funny.
Wait, tell me. I'm forgetting. I know the praying mantis one. What's the Bed Bath and Beyond?
It's stupid. I had bought a coffee maker from Bed Bath and Beyond was with a Keurig thing,
Uh-huh.
and like the K cup
Yeah, yeah,
holder
yeah.
thing, and we lost the K cup, and I go back to Bed Bath and Beyond, and I'm like dealing with the floor model and taking out the Keurig thing,
Uh-huh.
but I wasn't gonna steal it.
Okay.
I was gonna go ask the floor person how I could get one, and she was like, "Give me that!" Like she was like accusing me of stealing it, and I was like, I wasn't gonna steal it. And then I went to the store manager and I was like, this woman falsely accused me of stealing that. And he gave it to me.
Oh
He
shit.
gave me the
Okay,
piece. He
okay.
was like, I'm so sorry, just take it, whatever. And I told Chris that story and he wasn't paying attention. And
Right.
I was like, this is the best story I've ever told. you know, um, but then that stupid praying mantis story, which was also very funny.
No, that's really funny. And he's just not like, even I listening to it, because you're like, there could be, praying mantises everywhere, and I have a baby, and he's just like silent. And then you're like, are you listening? And he's like, oh yeah, no, do they bite? And you're like, well, they could, but it's scary. You could just tell.
No, it was done. You know what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
was done. Like it's really crazy. It's crazy. Like the whole thing is crazy. The craziest thing to me when I look back at it was, and I'm also very grateful for this piece, was that when it was the night before he died, me and him had this massive argument because like addict, alcoholic, I took it very personal that he was not involved in the show in the same way that he had been. And I thought it was because he had so many things going on. And we had this huge argument the night before he died. And he wound up like crying and he was like, he's like, all I want to do is the show. And like, I don't even know why I'm in school. All I want to do is make the show. And like we told each other we loved each other. We ended on this really
Okay.
beautiful note, and then he was also like, he was using, I didn't
Right.
know. He was fighting with his girlfriend. And I thought I believed him because I was gullible. And in the middle of the night, she texted me, I'm really worried about Chris. Can you check on him? And I woke up at like 6:11 in the morning and like Chris was notoriously responsive to me texting him. Like if I texted him in the middle of the night, he texts me back. And at 6:11 in the morning or 6:12 or something like that, I texted him, Chris, are you all right? I'm worried about you. And at 6:12 or 6:13, a minute later, he texts me back. He wrote, I'm okay, not good, but I'm alive. I'll call you later. That was his text. At 10:30, his girlfriend called me and told me she found him dead. So like, it's just, I'm alive, he texts me. So as far as foreshadowing, like I've never experienced anything like that where he texts me that he's alive 4 hours before he's not. Like that's pretty, like that was heavy duty. But it's a crazy story, 100%.
Did you ever consider not continuing the show, or was it?
I considered it. I didn't consider it seriously.
Okay.
Linda was considering it a lot more seriously than I was.
I bet.
Because like I'm so obsessed with the show. I'm more obsessed with my family, but I'm very obsessed with the show.
Yeah. Was it big by then when he died? Was it already like a big thing or no?
No, it
Okay.
was not a big thing. I mean, like it was bigger than when it started. Like,
Right.
I feel like when he died, maybe we were getting 60 or maybe we were getting like 70,000 downloads a year or something when he died. I think the month before he died, we had tried to get Artie Lang from the Howard Stern show on Dopey for years. And the month before Chris died, we got Artie Lang to go on the show. And me and Chris went to Hoboken to record with Artie Lang. And Chris was high and Artie was high. And then we took a boat back from Hoboken back to Manhattan. And that was the last time I saw Chris in person. But the Artie show, like, did really well. So like that was like really well. And then when Chris died, it was almost as if anybody who had ever listened to the show came back to hear what happened. So the show like maybe got an extra 50,000 downloads because Chris died. And then we were kind of just hanging out there, but it became big because This American Life covered us.
Okay.
And This American Life has 60 million downloads the first month it comes out or something.
Is that another podcast? I don't actually even know. I hear you reference that often. I don't even know it's another show.
It's a show that a guy named Ira Glass does for National Public Radio.
Oh, okay.
And it's always like a top 10.
Okay. Got it. All right.
Like across the board, like a massive podcast. And because This American Life did this 15-minute piece on Dopey, which is really a great piece. I mean, our downloads, doubled or something, And then I started getting more and more famous people.
And stuff. Yeah. Do you have a favorite guest that you've ever had?
I mean, I always say my favorite guest on the show was Todd.
Okay.
But that's also because the first time Todd was on the show, he called me and me and Chris were recording and Todd didn't know.
I've heard that episode and it's like great. Yeah. It's so funny. Yeah. You just answer the phone. Yeah.
And he's like, he had just gotten arrested, for buying weed in a project building and we're recording the show. Like that was like one of my favorite moments.
Yeah.
I loved having Todd on the show. Famous people. Artie was like a mountain to climb, but he was so fucked up when he was on that it was like uncomfortable.
Okay. So you knew he was high.
I didn't know if he was high or just mentally deranged.
Okay.
But in the end, like the thing about Artie though, is he's such a pro. If you ever listened, I don't know if you listened to that episode, but the end of that episode, he does this crazy soliloquy.
That's like one of the one episodes I actually haven't listened to. I haven't listened to that one. I will now.
It's a disaster because he's definitely strung out on coke or crystal or something. And Chris is like out of it. It's a mess. But the end of it, Artie is like brilliant. So like the Artie episode, because I was such a fan of the Stern Show, was very meaningful to me. I mean, I had a bunch. I had a bunch of favorites. Michael Imperioli, who played Christopher on The Sopranos.
Yeah.
Like I think he actually is a drug addict, but he didn't want to say that on the show. But at the end of the episode, he did a scene from The Sopranos with me.
That's so cool.
Where I played Christopher and he played this junkie that I love that scene. Like I love that. Bubble, Andre Royo, who played Bubbles on The Wire. We did a scene from The Wire, which I mean, like I never wanted to be an actor and I still don't, but it's cool to do fucking weird reenactments.
No, that's super cool. That's awesome.
Mark Maron, that's like the closest thing to a God shot I ever had was like, I thought the show was going to end. Like I was like, the show is ending.
Yeah.
Like when you asked me that, like the show was ending because it sucked. You know what I mean? And I basically said to Linda and I said to the audience, I'm going to do the show until it sucks or it's not fun. And it sucked. Like we had an episode and I don't remember the lady's name, Amber something from Teen Mom.
Okay.
I had her on the phone and she was very sweet, but it wasn't great. There was a bunch of interviews I did on the phone. Like I tell you all the time, like,
use the phone,
use the phone or just like remote interviews. Like I lost interest in it. I didn't like how it felt. And I was just like, I don't like it. And then I was at Katz's and I had this very famous writer scheduled to come on the show. This guy, David Sheff. He wrote the book Beautiful Boy. His son wrote Tweak, Nick Sheff. You ever read Tweak?
No, but I've seen. Wait, they made this a movie, right? Didn't they make it a movie?
Okay. They called it. They put the two books together and they called the movie Beautiful Boy.
Okay.
And it was a very famous movie. And so I got David Sheff to come on for the movie. And I'm at Katz's and I'm waiting tables at Katz's. And I remember I'm picking up a tray full of matzo ball soup. And I look at my phone and it's David Sheff canceling. He's like, I'll do it in 6 months. And it's like, and I think I wrote back, motherfucker, like, it's like the whole point is that your movie's out now and it makes us seem like we mean something.
Right.
But I was just like, fuck. And I went outside of Katz's and I'm like smoking or vaping or whatever. And Mark Maron comes walking down the street. I was like, what am I going to do? And then Mark Maron is there. And I was like, holy shit. And then he came in. I invited him to come to Katz's the next morning and I bought him breakfast and told him about the show. And after annoying the shit out of him, he agreed to come on the show. And we did it in person and it was really very thrilling.
And that reignited you. I don't think I ever knew that. I don't think I knew you were this close to stopping the show. You've probably said that before, but I didn't know that.
I don't know if how close I really was. Like, I know that like there are stretches in the history of Dopey where it's not good.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, you make 415 episodes, there's going to be some clunkers.
Yeah.
And there's some periods where it was just like, you know, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really know how to make the show work. And
Yeah. Yeah. But see, I like to hear you say that because I feel like that sometimes too. In fact, sometimes I feel like I need to go back and listen to old episodes and clean them up and delete some. And I haven't yet. But I like that you
don't.
haven't because
No.
you
Just be
hear
done with
like,
it.
you know, yeah. Well, and I love that you guys were smoking too. I love that you were smoking in those early episodes and he's vaping. It's just real, you know, and that's obviously what resonated with you guys, you know? So, okay, last thing I'm going to ask you because I know I've been talking to you forever. I thank you for your time so much. So,
It's fun. It makes me feel important. It's fun.
so the addict thing, right? So, are you, because you wanted to host a show, right? You wanted to do a talk show. You are as a result of your addiction. So, one of my main messages on my show is that I'm so glad that I became a heroin addict. It's like my favorite thing about myself is that I was a fucking drug addict. Like, it's the best part of me is that I was a heroin addict, seriously, and that I'm in recovery and like all the things that it gave me. And I did not feel that way because like I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to be a lawyer. Like I got really good SAT scores. I would be like smoking meth with people homeless and be like, I got a 1400 on my SATs. I would like tell people that I was like doing drugs with because I thought like it made me different and all this shit. And so for a long time, I had a lot of obviously like shame and regret around losing all of those dreams. I don't feel that way anymore. I'm so glad for my addiction. In light of what your addiction gave you, which is this amazing show and community and brand, so-called, that you built, are you grateful for your addiction?
I never look at it like that. I don't look at it like that. But I mean, forget anything else. You know, forget Dopey and all of our Dopey merch and stuff and, you know, all that shit, Dopey art, whatever. I wouldn't have my kids. You know what I mean? Like, if I hadn't become a drug addict, I wouldn't have my children, I don't think. So I can't, like, I used to regret losing that apartment in Manhattan. Like, that
That's
was
a
my
big one.
biggest.
I would regret. That would be fair if you still chalk that up as a regret. That's legit.
I regretted that. Big for a long time, but I don't know that I'd have my children if I hadn't lost that apartment. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Okay. Okay.
I'm grateful to have recovery. I'm grateful to have a spiritual practice. I'm grateful to have Dopey, but I just love my kids. You know what I mean? Like I'm just like I'm so that's what I am focused on more than anything. And it's like I might be focused more on Dopey than that, but they only exist because of that, and I'm plugged into them as souls, as individuals. So like it's bigger than anything else because they wouldn't exist. This is a weird existential question, really.
I know.
Um,
I know.
I do love my recovery, but I wouldn't care if I didn't have it, if I
Okay.
hadn't had to be an addict. You know what I mean? Like
Okay.
if I had just been a pothead and like we can go back to my first regret was not being a film student. What if I had been a film student stoner and I made some amazing,
Right.
I wrote a great stoner classic before I ever became a heroin addict, which I deleted in my heroin addiction.
No, are you
Um,
serious? I was going to say, wait,
so
make
maybe
that.
Maybe I regret that. That movie was brilliant. It was a stoner classic called The Chill Bug. And The Chill Bug posed the question that can you ever really be chilling if you're not going to be bugging out at some point? And can you ever be bugging out if you're not really chilling? It was a stoner classic. Um, but no, I'm very satisfied with all of the mistakes and of my life because I have a really really nice life right now.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm so glad that I got to connect with you and you were willing to do it online.
No, I just wasn't willing to do Dopey online.
Right. Of
But
course.
I because I'm sick. But before we go, I want to tell you about my other movie idea.
Okay.
It's called Bum Trip, and
Okay.
two bums in New York who are tired of the weather, so they want to be bums in Florida, and the movie follows the bums take a trip to Florida.
That's a really good idea.
Comedy, dark comedy.
I think I have a really good idea for a movie too. So it's called Zeros with an X. But I had this idea like 15 years ago, so it probably wouldn't work anymore. Remember how they used to have like Xerox like places that you would go to, like a FedEx place? It's sort of like, what's that movie with all the kids? Empire Records. They work at Empire Records. It's like Empire Records, but they work at this
Kinko's.
Xerox store. Yeah, exactly. They work at Kinko's in like, Barstow somewhere, and it's called Zeros. But obviously there would have to be some sort of like arc in there. But I always thought that would be a good stoner movie too, just like Empire Records.
I never saw Empire Records.
Oh, it's pretty good. You would like it, I think.
Is that with Liv Tyler?
Yes. And it's all centered around like their love of music. They're like playing music a lot. How have you, of all people, not seen this movie? You should see it.
I think I was a junkie when that
You were absolutely a junkie at the time that came out, for sure.
I was too cool to be bothered with Empire Records at that time. No, I had finally not cared. I had finally gotten to a place where I couldn't be. All I could watch was 90210 reruns. That I couldn't watch Empire Records.
Okay, you know what? Actually, I do want to ask you another question. So Aaron and I said what our 90210 astrological signs would be. And I said that I would be either a Kelly with a Valerie rising, depending on what year of my life you're catching me, or a Valerie with a Kelly rising. What would you be? And you don't have to know astrology to know what any of that means, because I don't really know what that means.
I'll tell you. Well, that's interesting. It's unfortunate. I mean, David Silver is a Jew, but there's very little David Silver.
No, you're not similar.
I guess there'd be some kind of Steve Dylan.
Yes,
thing.
It would be a Steve Dylan combination. Yes, no, you do know how to do it. That's right. You would be on the cusp of Dylan and Steve.
If Steve was Jewish and middle class.
Right. But like
his wealthy goy undoes the Steve thing for me.
Remember his stupid license plate? I ate a Ferrari.
God bless Steve. What was his last name on the
show?
Steve Sanders. I was going to say Steve Schneider.
Then you guys would be closer. Okay, well, this will be an easy one. Who was your favorite character?
It's not an easy one. It's so funny. It's either Brandon or Dylan.
Yeah.
I liked that when they were friends.
Yeah.
That's when I liked the show.
Totally.
I enjoyed them being friends.
Yeah.
I didn't like what happened to their friendship.
Right. Did you watch the college years? Because sometimes I feel like, because I loved the college years and the high school years, but I liked the college years more. And so sometimes I'm like, I feel like that's not really 90210 classic. Do you have a preference between the two?
Oh, I think I prefer the college years too.
Oh, you do? Okay. Erin said the same thing. I thought she was going to tell me that wasn't like 90210 classic, but I definitely preferred the college years.
And there's actually a line from the show that just triggered in my brain, which is when, I don't know why this happened, when David Silver got addicted to meth and the dealer is like, he says, come in. He goes, why don't you take your socks off and sit a spell? He says, but I don't know why he wants it. He's not shooting his feet up. Like, why do you want him to take his socks off?
Oh, that's weird.
I wonder if that line is actually that line, but I know he said sit a spell. Take your socks off and sit a spell.
But their drug scenes were always weird. Although actually Kelly played a pretty good coke addict.
And Dylan was decent as being a junkie. David wasn't bad. David wasn't bad on meth either. It was just the fact that they drank their meth in orange juice, which was so bizarre. Like, why? Why did they drink their meth in orange juice? Why would that be the thing?
Why would that be how you did it? Right, yeah.
Like, why would that be? Like, you could smoke meth. You could shoot meth. You could snort it. Like, why are you drinking it in orange juice? Like,
well, they can't show any of that on that show, though.
Dylan...
Oh wait, they showed Dylan like falling out? Oh wait, no, they showed Dylan bent over, right? Is he supposed to? But I think he's snorting in that moment.
No, he would smoke. He smoked heroin off the foil.
Oh, okay.
Dylan
right, because it was LA.
He smoked heroin off the foil.
Dylan. There was some LA writer in that writer's room who's like, "No, it's tar out here,"
right,
and they knew.
Yeah, I'm sure, exactly. But what about the meth and orange juice? I would love to know more about that.
I'll look into it and let you know.
We need to know more about that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, dude. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Janine. It's fun.